Hey, what's going on, everyone? Let's talk about the books that I was able to pick up in the month of August. I only picked up one myself since publishers sent me quite a few, so I didn't want to go too overboard. Let's get started with the ones I've already finished. So first up, we have Catherine Hanley's Nemesis, Medieval England's Greatest Enemy from Osprey. This is an author that I've been really enjoying for the most part. I read her 1217 earlier this year. I thought that one was just okay, but I did read her biography of Empress Matilda quite a while ago, and that kind of took off on the Historathon Discord, so I'm really glad to see that. And this one is definitely in that style, that vein. This is something of a biography of Philip Augustus of France, who really did a lot trying to play the long game against his English Angevin rivals, most notably with was it Henry II, Richard the Lionhearted, and King John. And the author talks about, all his misplays as well as his good moves as he's trying to basically playing 4D chess against them. Like I said, definitely picturing more of the long game. So it's not like a pure biography in that sense. There's definitely a focus on his kind of dealings with the English rather than everyone else in medieval Europe at the time, but from Philip Augustus's sort of lens. But like I said, it was really interesting seeing how he was able to kind of consolidate power, do what he could against pretty decent opponents, but also how he really capitalized on any opportunity that the Angevins gave him. He really kind of put his foot down and try to capitalize as much as possible. And what's interesting is the author, like I said, doesn't really idolize him too much. She kind of points out where he kind of, slips up a little bit, or probably history should not kind of just kind of forget about certain things. For example, a lot of people kind of criticize his role in the Crusades. He participates in the Siege of Acre. Richard and him are able to take the city, and then he kind of just leaves the scene after that. Granted, he did have some health issues and stuff, but a lot of people, kind of consider that, technically, I guess, it's like a win, but it's not really exactly what they set out to do, per se. One other thing is letting King John's nephew, Arthur, probably technically a vassal of Philip Augustus, and kind of, he understands that King John's probably just gonna, take care of him, and doesn't really do enough to he uses him sort of as a pawn to make King John look bad, which, like I said, King John kind of definitely just plays right into his hand, but obviously that's very callous and not super great. But over the long game, like I said, the author kind of shows, look at the state of Europe when he takes over as the ruler of France, and where France is on his deathbed and stuff, and how he's able to die peacefully in his sleep and everything. Where it is 40 odd years, actually I think it's almost 50 years later, and how things have changed and the tables have turned quite a bit in France's favor. So, like I said, really enjoyed that one. Next up, Basic Books was kind enough to send me Rob Dunn's The Call of the Honey Guide, What Science Tells Us About How to Live Well with the Rest of Life. So I got a full video review of this one if you want to check that one out. But briefly, this is a book about human relationships with other organisms, mainly symbioses and mutualisms, where both species benefit. I really enjoyed how the book he explains we don't necessarily always have the right definitions and vocabulary when dealing with a lot of this stuff. Just a lot of times with mutualisms, the defining definition of whether it's successful is just how many offspring are reproduced from each side, and that's the benefit. But he kind of argues, there could be other ways to find that benefit, such as longevity of the organisms, probably the happiness and just quality of life of these organisms, stuff like that. The author also uses an interesting tactic where he shows it from the other organism's point of view, probably most notably with yeast in the fermentation of alcohol. How yeast, might have been kind of, from their perspective, if you could get inside a single cell like yeast, I guess concept of consciousness, even though they don't obviously have one. Maybe they were domesticating humans, if you kind of look at it from that kind of perspective, which I thought was really interesting, kind of a different sort of take. But like I said, if you want to hear more about it, definitely check out my other video. And then, let's see, W.W. Norton was kind enough to send me a care package of some ancient history titles. So I've read this one, I'm reading the next one, and I gotta get to the last one. But we got Claudia of Rome, Champion of the Republic by Douglas Boyd. And unfortunately, I've read one of his other books, Alaric the Goth. And it kind of, I would say the flaws in this one are the same one in that one, in that he picks a subject matter ostensibly to do a life and times sort of biography, and it just doesn't really work out. We just don't have enough on like either of these people, like Claudia in this example, and Alaric in the other one, to really do that justice. So you're kind of getting more of, like I said, just kind of the context and times of, you know, the late, you know, kind of falling stage of the Republic for aristocratic women, what it was like, you know, what benefits did they have, and disadvantages did they have, and things of that nature. But what's interesting is during this time period is there is kind of this like generation or two that had it fairly well, compared to their foremothers and then their grandkids, as far as women are concerned. In that under Augustus, a lot of restrictions were put on women, but also in the generations before, you know, you're kind of in that weird Cata, kind of like mindset that was quite dominant. But there's a couple generations there where they were able to like hold property a lot, I should say, like more easily, as well as be part of the public sphere. Even some legal stuff as well. So it was interesting. I definitely learned a few things. Like I said, I feel like there's not much Claudia of Rome in this in this book ostensibly about Claudia. So like I said, it kind of falls into that same trap with Alaric the Goth. We just don't have enough information to really do like a solid biography of any nature of that. Next one is one that I'm reading right now, and it's The Far Edges of the Known World, Life Beyond the Borders of Ancient Civilization by Owen Reese. And this one is fantastic. I didn't even know about this one until they asked me if I'd like to read it. And what the author does is there's 4 different eras, and I'm on section 3, which is the Roman world, but he's got prehistory, the Greek world, the Roman world, and basically late antiquity with beyond the classical world. And each unit has 3 or 4 different kingdoms or nations or civilizations that aren't the like kind of the, you know, a lot of them either didn't leave their own literary record, so they're always being like told from the perspective of other people's, you know, usually like kind of the dominant culture that was always like antagonizing them, for example. But just I found the selections very good. Like for example, the Great Cataract, Sudan. So you're dealing with like Nubia a lot. And Egypt obviously dealing with Nubia. The Greek chapters I really love. He picked Obia, Massalia, which is one of my favorite ones, and Nocratis in Egypt, a major trading outpost, which just doesn't, even though there is like a record there of like Nocratis, you know, you always like read about it, but you don't really get it from like their perspective and how kind of unique their situation was, being kind of their own like little colony, you know, on the Nile in Egypt during the classical period. So I feel like his selections have been really good so far, and each one's got just enough to be. I do wish like each one might have been like a little bit longer, like, you know, that extra 10 pages on each one, but I feel like they're fairly fleshed out for what they are. And you almost, like, even though there isn't so much of a super golden thread narrative per se, I just feel like the way it's structured and stuff is tending towards since it's chronological, fairly chronological. Like I said, it just has a very good read. I don't even know. I'm probably not explaining that part really good. Since each chapter is kind of its own distinct unit, you could just read them separately, but I feel like it is going quite well reading it like in order. Where I have read a couple books, something like this, where each chapter is a different, you know, either geographic region or something like that, and it just feels very like, you know, each one is just like their own like little podcast episode, and this doesn't quite feel like that, so that's a really, really good thing. And then one other one that W.W. Norton has sent that I haven't got to is Between Two Rivers, Ancient Mesopotamia and the Birth of History by Moody Al-Rashid. And I don't think I've read anything on the Bronze Age or Mesopotamia in quite a while, so just looking forward to something kind of on the subject matter. I don't know too much about it, but what I was interested in too is on the back of the book in the little blurbs and stuff, he has some nature authors like Robert McFarlane on the blurb. So I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if it's going to be like kind of more of a natural history, or that's like going to maybe be a big part of it. I'm not 100% sure. But I thought that was just really cool. And also Rebecca Ragg Sykes, who wrote a really fantastic book called Kindred that I have, which is just like the gold standard of books on Neanderthals. So I have no idea. I think this is going to be kind of more, not so much a political history, but more of a cultural and like all the other kinds of histories like kind of put together in one. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. And then one last one here is one that I did pick up, and it's Growing an Edible Landscape: How to Transform Your Outdoor Space into a Food Garden by Gary Pillarchik and Shara Damore. So I don't know either of the authors, but the topic is one that I find really interesting. So I had a garden this year with the job change and the wife being pregnant and stuff. The garden definitely kept like falling down like the priority list, but we still did like good and everything. Grew a lot more flowers than normal, but around the property, I really got to do videos. Like I used to do a lot of like walking videos where you could see the yard and the gardens and stuff. There are a couple things I'd like to start trying, maybe like fruit trees. Definitely like raspberries and blackberries and maybe blueberries. Is definitely something I want to kind of expand on and do. We had kind of a shared raspberry patch that got demolished like 2 winters ago, so kind of learning more about how to do better with that. So it's all about like, you know, when you're doing stuff in your yard for landscaping, like making it so it's like beneficial as far as like having like edible produce, whether it's not like, you know, the traditional vegetable species that you normally think of growing and stuff. So I think I will learn quite a bit from it and looking forward to it. And like I said, I like adding to my nature collection. So there you have it. Those are the books that I was able to pick up in the month of August. Let me know what your favorite book that you picked up was. And always remember, whatever you read in October, read victoriously.